Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got neglected and becomes the Mercenary Tao? Part 1. Huge shout out to RivalsToLovers for this story. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Prologue. What do you want from us? Asked a man who shook from head to toe in fear, standing protectively in front of his pregnant wife and child. The whole family held each other in fear as they stared upon the menacing figure in their midst, a man whose very appearance brought dread and apprehension to those who saw him. He was a man of around 5'10", blonde hair pulled back into a tightly braided ponytail that just so happened to a pink hair bow on the end of it, a pencil-style mustache on his upper lip, and 3 whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks. He was dressed in a pink cheongsam that had the symbol of the word kill draped over the heart, the phrase kill you. Printed on the back of the pink outfit in a bright red and strapped to his back was a sword safely tucked away in a sheath, waiting to be drawn. The assassin, who had his arms folded formally behind his back, smirked at them with a menacing, malicious gleam in his sapphire blue eyes, his eyes promising the family that untold tragedy was about to befall them. Their brother has decided that he wishes to seize control over the company you head and has even hired me full price to take you and your wretched little weakling family out. In fact, he's willing to pay full price 3 times over to ensure I get all 3 of you, he said to them with that small but very menacing smirk still on his face. The unnamed family man, out of instinct, quickly pulled what appeared to be some kind of tomahawk off of his wall, and this only caused the blonde assassin to raise an eyebrow in amusement. With a determined gleam now in his eye, the man threw the tomahawk with all of his might at the unidentified assassin, hoping that he would wind up killing that had been sent after his family. Unfortunately for this businessman, the person he was facing was no ordinary assassin. The assassin, upon seeing the tomahawk get flung at him, opened his mouth and caught the tomahawk with his teeth, clenching down hard on the blade. Upon seeing this, the man and his family paled and quickly backed away. What truly set the dread for them, however, was how the blonde assassin then bit down hard enough on the blade to reduce the metallic half of the throwing weapon to chunks of scrap metal. The assassin spat out the pieces of metal in his mouth and proceeded to catch the handle of the tomahawk in his head before it could hit the floor. Placing the handle between his right index and middle fingers, he pulled his arm back and then flung the handle with devastating force at the man. The result was the man being pierced so hard through the skull by the handle that it actually continued its path through his head and into the skull of his pregnant wife, where it remained embedded. As the 2 bodies fell, the little boy burst into tears over what just happened to his parents. Trembling in both fear and rage, he glared up at the assassin, and with what the assassin assumed what was supposed to be a battle cry, the boy charged at him with his fist beaked back. After letting out a derisive scoff, the assassin proceeded to slam the ends of his toes into the boy's neck with a devastating front kick, resulting in the boy's neck being sheared through and ending in a decapitation. Quietly jumping backwards away from the gory blood spray to avoid getting any of it on him, the assassin chuckled over his deed and then exited the house, heading into a horse-drawn carriage where his client was waiting. Once inside, the assassin sat down on the comfy leather seat and looked his client in the eyes. The deed is done, and it was pitifully easy. At that came the slimy, skin-crawling voice of the assassin. The client smirked in appreciation and nodded his head over the job well done, glad to see that he was right to hire the man in front of him. Excellent job. I am glad I hired you, Tao. It's always nice to have somebody I can rely. So, that's 30 million, yes. 10 for my brother, 10 for his wife, and 10 for his little brat. You'll find the money transferred to your Rift Country account, as promised. If you're up for it, I have another job for you, involving the daimyo of Tsuchi no Kumi himself, and he's willing to pay full price for this deed done as well, came the voice of his client. The assassin, who had been referred to by the name of Tao, focused his full attention on his client and smirked as a gleam of greed appeared in his sapphire blue eyes. My deeds have become so infamous that I've obtained the notice of a daimyo, have I? What's the job? Tao asked his client with a devilish smirk on his face, twirling some of the hairs on his mustache with the fingers on his right hand. A while ago, one of the daimyo's daughters had been kidnapped Gato, as in the Gato of Gato Kanpani, the shipping magnate. The woman was later found dead, and unfortunately for the daimyo, she hadn't been saved because the Tsuchikage had some emergency crisis going on in his village, and as such, was unable to send anyone on the mission. Once I had become aware of this issue, I had offered your services to him, and he seemed most intrigued. He wants Gato dead as revenge for the death of his daughter. Last we heard, Gato was making some kind of stronghold in Nami no Kuni, and that's where he has been for the past several months. If you accept the job, the daimyo will pay full price, and even more than that should you accept the job. What do you say, interested? The client had asked the assassin, which had caused a blonde murderer to smirk and nod his head. Tell him I accept and that I'll head to Nami no Kuni as soon as I am able. I'll even personally kill the worthless little midget and bring the head to the daimyo himself as proof of my deeds. After all, here he paused for a moment to smirk in glee at the thought of not only having more money, but also at the thought of having the Tsuchi no Kuni daimyo's favor. Mercenary Tao is never one to turn down a job when I can benefit so much from it, he said to the man, who chuckled in amusement. But that said and done, the two of them awaited silently for the horse-drawn carriage to take the two of them to their destination, so that Mercenary Tao could then begin his contract. No. I want to go on a real mission for once, Dadabeo. I'm tired of these chores, Taochin. Screamed a redeeded green-eyed female Kanagaker Genin, her cheeks red with anger as she glared menacingly at the man behind the Hokage's chair. Her name was Mito Uzumaki Namikaze, and she was the pride and joy of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. The yellow flash just sweat-dropped at the exuberance of his daughter, glancing to his left at his wife Kushina, who was openly chuckling at her daughter's antics. He sighed to himself and rubbed the bridge of his nose, realizing just from that look alone that he wouldn't be getting any help from her on this matter, which made things worse as he knew fully well that Mito could be as stubborn as her mother. Musum-chan, I just don't feel you're ready for a C rank yet. There are still some things we need to work on, Minato said to his daughter, summoning up all of the patience that he could muster. It wasn't the first time that Mito and him would get into an argument like this, and as such, he knew from experience just how difficult it was to get his daughter to listen when she really wanted something. These D ranks are crap. You and Kachin have trained me hard for years, and out of all of the genin teams here in Konoha, one with me and Kakashi-sensei on it will surely be more than enough to handle simple bandits. How else am I gonna find a Naichin if I don't get there and explore? She shouted at him with a fuming expression on her face. On cue, the mentioning of Naruto had caused Minato and Kushina to wince, their heads drooping a bit. Naruto was always a sore subject with the two parents in particular, because every mention of him just reminded them of how much they failed to be good parents to him. It had been 7 years since Naruto had vanished from Konoha, and the worst part is, they didn't even realize he had been gone until Mito had pointed out how she hadn't seen him for a week. Due to Naruto not possessing chakra or even a chakra network, they had focused on their daughter far so much that they had failed to give their son any of their attention. They weren't the only ones that were guilty, either. Kakashi had all but ignored Naruto, and Jiraiya considered Mito the apple of his eye, having little to no interest in Naruto. The only one who seemed to care was Tsunade, as the very second she had found out Naruto was missing, she immediately left Konoha with Shizune and Taunton in tow, and vowed to never return until she found Naruto, alive or dead. Mito blamed herself as the main reason that he had vanished, as because when Naruto was around, she would do everything to steal her parents' attention away from Naruto, and even blamed him for something she did, all because she felt he was beneath her for not having chakra. Ever since he left, though, she had realized what she had done, and vowed that she would bring her Naisen home, if it was the last thing she ever did. However, she had discovered a neat little thing she could to ensure her parents gave her access to a lot of stuff they wouldn't have let her have before. She often used Naruto's name to get what she wanted, and they would often cave to her demands because they felt guilty for ignoring him when he was around. So, she knew that the perfect way to get a C rank going was for her to use his name. While she did feel regret over manipulating her parents like she was doing, she felt that she had to do it because ever since he left, they had a tendency to baby her and overprotect her, as if they were afraid that she would up and disappear on them as well. If that's what she needed to do, then so be it. After all, ninjas used any and all tools at their disposal in order to achieve their goals, and that's what she was doing. Minato, predictably, caved in with a sigh. He ran his hand through his hair and muttered words under his breath unintelligibly as he sorted through the available C ranks, beepizing them and reading through them with a critical eye. After sorting through the papers a bit, he found one that seemed rather easy and simple to do. The simple escort mission to Wave, a bridge builder by the name of Tazuna, needing a single team of ninja to protect him from bandits. It sounded simple, easy, and relatively safe for his daughter to take. At least, it was a lot safer than the other C ranks involved, which involved entering countries that had their own ninja forces. Most of them were in countries that had coldly neutral to Konohagakure, at best, and he would be damned before he sent his daughter into an enemy country before she was ready. Shrugging his shoulders and having made his decision, he smiled at Mito and informed them of the details. I have a relatively simple mission for you, then, Team 7. A bridge builder by the name of Tazuna needs a team to protect him from bandits. This should be safe enough to send you, think of it as a little test to see how far you've gone. Sent Tazuna in, Amaka-chan, the yellow flash said to Team 7 for a moment before calling out to his secretary. In a flash, a drunken old man with a bottle of sake clutched into his hand in a way that made it seem like the sake bottle was his most priceless treasure and looked at the team assembled before. All I get are a bunch of brats, Hokage-sama. They look like a fierce enough breeze would shatter half of the bones in their bodies, he slurred out in a drunken haze, which caused Mito, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno to scowl in irritation. Minato shook his head in an exasperated manner before looking at Tazuna with a serious gleam in his crystal blue eyes. I assure you that Team 7 is fully capable of protecting you from bandits, Tazuna-san. Bandits are rarely a threat to ninjas, so long as the ninjas in question are adequately trained. Besides, you have my student Kakashi with you, so even if the genin aren't up to snuff, he should be able to deal with the bandits himself, Minato informed Tazuna in a patient manner, taking particular notice of the sudden nervousness that overcame the bridge builder. Minato noticed out of the corner of his eye that Kushina had also taken notice of Tazuna's nervousness, which was good as he didn't just imagine it. I am sure my cute little genin are more than up to the challenge of facing mere bandits, Minato-sensei Sharingan no Kakashi said with an eye smile. Tazuna nervously nodded his head and left the office, Team 7 doing the same. Somehow, Minato's uneasiness wasn't comforted by the reassurance of his student. The next day. It was a whole new day in Konohagakure, and Team 7 was alright right out the gates, in typical manji formation. Their forms were lax, as because they weren't expected to arrive in wave for quite a number of hours. Mito was giddy, as because that means that she could start looking for her Itachi and bring him home. That, and she was finally on a real mission, even if she found the client to be a useless old drunk. Taking the time to look at her surroundings, she chose to examine her teammates, one at a time. First, there was Sakura Haruno. Sakura started out as a shy bookworm with confidence issues a mile wide, but ever since Mito befriended her, she had come out of her shell and was a kunoichi that the Uzumaki Namikaze could fully trust to watch her back. Perfect chakra control, decent reserves, a doten affinity, proficiency in Ryujutsu, she was a well-rounded and excellent teammate to have. She had even tied for Kunoichi of the Year with Mito, albeit it was because her book smarts had helped even out her inferior practical grades, well, inferior to Mito, at least. Mito's paper grades, on the other hand, weren't as good as her practical exams, and that was what led to them tying. Then there was Sasuke Uchiha, a boy who was haunted by the massacre of his clan at the hands of his older brother, Itachi. Fully matured Sharingan, Kaiten and Raiten affinities, excellent gain jutsu and taijutsu, he was rising on up and up with the help of Kakashi-sensei, Sakura, as well as Mito and her family. They were very close friends at one point until the massacre happened, then Sasuke pushed her and everyone else away, at first. However, her Kachin Kushina was a good friend of Sasuke's Kachin Makoto, and she didn't allow Sasuke to wallow in that dark pit he was in for long. Thanks to Mito and the rest of her family, Sasuke had come a long way to letting go of the hatred and desires of revenge in his heart. He still wanted to bring his older brother down, but now he wanted to do it as a team. There was very little she could say about Kakashi-sensei. He was a damned good ninja and had taught all three of them quite a lot. It was mainly because of them that they had learned how to work as a cohesive unit. Then there was Mito herself, Futon and Suiton affinities, excellent Kinjutsu, massive chakra reserves, mastery of her four-tailed Bijuu shroud, a sensor, she was a virtual powerhouse, if she may say so herself. All three of them had dreams, and they were going to achieve them together. She didn't know what she would do if she didn't have her team with her. Her thoughts were interrupted when Sasuke whispered in his ear about a mysterious puddle laying in the middle of the road. Blinking her eyes in surprise, she looked at the puddle and narrowed her eyes in suspicion. Why would there be a puddle in the middle of the road when it hasn't rained in days? Taking a glance at Kakashi and Sakura, she could tell by their expressions that they had noticed it as well. Considering they were all in the know, there shouldn't really be any surprises waiting for them. Just as they passed by the puddle, two Kurigakure Nukenin appeared out of the puddle and rushed at them. Too bad for them that Sakura had prepared a gain jutsu in advance and quickly caught them in the Meijin. Jubaku Satsu gain jutsu, which froze them in place long enough for Mito and Sasuke to unleash a collaboration jutsu on them. Quickly forming hand seals, they called out the names of their techniques as Kakashi and Sakura grabbed Tazuna and got out of range. Futon. Tatapa. Kaiten. Gakakyu no jutsu. In a flash, their techniques were unleashed and the demon brothers were turned to ashes. After Team 7 high-fived each other, Kakashi turned to Tazuna and glared at him, demanding an explanation from him without saying a word. Tazuna started sweating nervously and broke down in a flash, telling them the circumstances surrounding his duplicity. While Team 7 understood his plight, the fact that the client lied and got them involved in a mission that they clearly weren't ready for was something that they couldn't ignore. No matter how much Tazuna begged them or tried to guilt-trip them, they wouldn't budge. In a flash, they were sprinting back to Konoha, leaving a broken Tazuna crying on the ground as his last hope seemed to vanish in a flash. Or, at least, so it seemed to Tazuna. From his position in the trees, a blonde-haired blue-eyed assassin observed the whole debacle between Tazuna and Team 7, finding it amusing that his baby sister would actually cut and run like that. This was good for him because it meant he could perform his mission without that bratty Redeed getting in his way and having Konohagakure try and drag him back home. He was well aware that the Redeed was a censor, but since he lacked chakra and get tight rein over his emotions, she had been unable to sense him. Deciding that now was the time to make his appearance, he jumped out of the trees he was in and landed in front of the still kneeling Tazuna, looking down at him with a smirk. Tazuna, upon noticing a new person standing in front of him, stopped his sobbing and looked up at the man standing over him. The bridge builder took notice of the symbol on the front of the man's outfit and widened his eyes as he backed away. "What do you want?" Tazuna asked, shaking from head to toe in fear over the mere presence of the 17-year-old blonde in front of him. Mercenary Tao's smirk widened just a bit and spoke up. "I am the man that holds your very fate in your hands, you miserable old drunk. If you don't wish to die, I suggest you listen up," he said in a derisive manner, which caused Tazuna to stiffen up and go silent. Upon seeing this, the assassin nodded his head and spoke once more. "I overheard your conversation about how Tazuna wants you dead. My name is Mercenary Tao, and I have been hired by a client, who shall remain nameless, to kill Gato. Since Gats has ninja after your head, I figure protecting your miserable hide will allow me to not only complete my mission, but collect some bounties while I'm at it. What do you say, old man?" he asked the man with that smirk still on his face. Tazuna's eyes widened in surprise when the person he thought to be an assassin sent to kill him said what he said. He was out to kill Gato. This was excellent news, his country could be free from that midget scumbag at last. He got on his hands and knees, clasped his hands and knees, and proceeded to beg. "I'll do anything if it means freeing my country from Gato, anything. Just please help me out," he begged Mercenary Tao desperately, which caused the blonde teenager to chuckle in amusement. Of course he would do anything to save his country. Tazuna and the people of Wave were wounded animals, and wounded animals were always desperate to get away. Which is why he saw this as a business opportunity for himself. He would be able to accomplish 3 jobs all at once in the same country. It just meant more and more money for him, after all. "Anything, you say? Well, in that case, I have a condition. When your little armpit of a country gets its economy back, your country has to pay me 10 million ryo, and not anything less than that when your bridge is done, and Gato is dead," Mercenary Tao demanded of the bridge builder, smirking much like a shark honing on a bleeding prey. Tazuna rapidly nodded his head, bowing to Mercenary Tao as he did so to show that he agreed. Seeing this, Mercenary Tao grinned excitedly and indicated for his new client to stand up, which the old wave-born man did. Mercenary Tao then made a shooing motion with his hand, telling Tazuna to lead the way. When Tazuna started moving towards the border to wave country once more. "I'm Skip." Tazuna and Mercenary Tao continued on their way to Nami no Kuni, the bridge builder, shrugging off the heavy mist that was rolling in. He seemed far more occupied with glancing at his impromptu employee every now and then. Mercenary Tao, having had enough of the constant staring, glared at the man with his teeth gritted into an irritated scowl and snapped at him. "Why do you keep looking at me, you accursed drunk? If you keep it up, I'll leave you with no eyes left to stare at me with," he growled at Tazuna, which caused said bridge builder to pale and stutter out an apology. "I am sorry, I was just wondering why you all look like the Hokage," he quickly got out, which caused Mercenary Tao to quirk his lips up into an amused smirk. So that's what the staring was about, was it? He got that a lot when it came to people who were aware of what the Yondaime Hokage looked like. They often wondered why he looked so much like the man, and most of the time, it was his victims who asked him about his appearance. Feeling no need to keep the information about his connection with the Yondaime a secret, since he doubted anyone would come to the bridge builder with the intent to seek out his identity, he found no reason to deny the man of the knowledge about who he was. "The man donated his sperm to the woman that birthed me into this world. That's all you need to know, now keep moving," he sneered at his employer, which caused Tazuna to gulp and continue on his way, his fear overriding the surprise he felt towards this young man being the son of the Yondaime. Like that, the journey continued, but not for long. The mist kept growing thicker and thicker, so much so that Tazuna was commenting on it. Mercenary Tao took that as a sign that there was something going on and made sure to keep all of his senses peeled for any sign of trouble. His senses were extremely sensitive, on the level of a canine, since it helped him keep track of his surroundings at all times and hunt any targets that might be trying to flee from him. Finely trained senses only made him even more deadly, after all. Mercenary Tao's ears twitched when it heard the sound of a large blade twirling through the air behind him. In a flash, he forcefully pushed Tazuna to the ground and then after folding his arms behind his back once more, backflipped over the large Zanbatsu and landed gracefully on his feet. The Zanbatsu, which he recognized as the legendary Kubikirabouchu, which if he wasn't mistaken, belonged to that of Zabuza Mamachi. Interesting turn of events this was the thought of the blonde mercenary. No sooner than did that thought race through his mind did Zabuza appear on top of the blade. Zabuza turned to look at the bridge builder and took in the form of Mercenary Tao. Interesting, I was under the impression that it was Sharingan no Kakashi and 3 genin brats that were protecting that old drunk. Instead, I see a single blonde teenager, which just makes my job easier. Hand over the old man, and I don't have to kill you, whoever you are, Zabuza said to Mercenary Tao in a gruff tone of voice, assuming that just because Mercenary Tao was an unknown to him that he won't have any problem dispatching him. Poor Zabuza, he had no idea what was about to befall him. Mercenary Tao just let out a derisive scoff. It doesn't matter if you don't know who I am. After all, I couldn't care less what a corpse thinks of me. As for me handing over the old man, I'd prefer to let him keep his miserable little life, kill you and your miscreant boss, and collect my many paychecks, he sneers at Zabuza, which caused the demon of the hidden mist to narrow his eyes and jump off his Zanbatsu. He then clenched the handle, plucked it out of the tree, and then thickened the mist with his Kurigaku no Jutsu. Now then, larynx, liver, spine, lungs, clavicle vein, jugular, kidneys, heart. All of them so vulnerable, which one should I strike? Zabuza asked, his voice seeming to echo in the mist. As Tazuna shook in his boots, Mercenary Tao let out a dismissive scoff. He could sense the killing intent in the mist and easily deduced that that fanciful speech the demon of the hidden mist made was just some foolish attempt to make him shake in his boots. Mercenary Tao did not cower in fear, he made others cower in fear, and Zabuza was gonna learn that today, in his last few moments before he suffered a death most violent and painful. What are you, an underachieving lazy little boy? You should hit all of them, of course. No kill like overkill, he called out into the mist mockingly, keeping his senses sharp and open so that he could figure out when Zabuza was coming. Hearing the harshly blowing wind coming from a specific direction, he quickly intercepted what he thought was Zabuza Mamachi with a well-placed knife hand chop to his throat. Zabuza let out a choking sound before he then dissolved into water. The real Zabuza then appeared behind Tao and attempted to cleave him in two vertically with his Zanbatsu. It seemed like he succeeded as the cleaver went straight through him, but it didn't seem to do anything. Suddenly, what was supposed to be Mercenary Tao grew rather shaky and fuzzy and then disappeared into the mist, almost as if it was just a mirage. Unknown to the A-rank Nuke Nin, Mercenary Tao had made excellent use of the Zanziken and quickly reappeared behind Zabuza. He performed a deadly fast palm strike that seemed to pierce directly through Zabuza's abdomen, which caused said Nuke Nin to look down at the hand going through his body with bulging eyes before Zabuza then turned into water again, revealing that it was yet another Mizubunshin. Mercenary Tao, with his arms still folded behind his back, jumped backwards as Zabuza attempted to cleave in half at the waist with his Zanbatsu, before then lunging forward and landing a particularly mean left hook into the Kurigaku Nuke Nin's face. Hissing in pain, Zabuza staggered back a bit and Mercenary Tao took advantage by kicking him in the abdomen with a quick front kick and then using that same leg to then launch his foot skywards and slam the ends of his toes right into Zabuza's chin, which snapped the Shinobigatana Nananinchu's head skywards. Thankfully for Zabuza, his neck wasn't snapped. Tao quickly attempted to perform a spinkick on Zabuza, only for the man to regain his bearings and spin out of the way, smashing his head forcefully into Tao's face, hitting him in the stomach with the pommel of his blade, and then slamming the flat end of his blade into the mercenary's body to smack him into the ground. Tao hit the ground with a loud crack and actually bounced off of it for a moment from the sheer force of the hit. As he bounced off of the ground, he flipped himself backwards and landed on the blade of Zabuza's massive sword. He then brought his hands forward and used the Mashin Gantsuki, assaulting Zabuza's stomach with a volley of fingertip punches, the last one sending the Nuke Nin forcefully into a tree. As Zabuza slid down the tree and hacked up a bit of blood, Mercenary Tao gracefully landed feet first on the ground again and cracked his neck. Well, looks like the demon of the mist isn't all he's cracked up to be. Getting slow in your old age, has arthritis finally set in? He questioned the former shinobi swordsman with a chuckle. Zabuza's response was to glare up at him and start gathering hand seals. Suiton. Miserapa. Zabuza shouted, calling out the name of his jutsu as he spit a powerful wave of water out of his mouth and Mercenary Tao. In a flash, he quickly brought his arms forward and took the brunt of the jutsu's damage to his arms. As the jutsu hit him, he stamped his feet into the ground and was slowly dragged backwards from the force of it, which caused his feet to make long, deep drag marks into the ground. However, the jutsu soon ended and Mercenary Tao brought down his arms, which appeared heavily bruised and lacked sleeves. Clapping mockingly over Zabuza's little achievement, Mercenary Tao proceeded to sprint at his opponent, who decided to get away from the tree he was pressed up against. The demon of the mist growled in irritation over his opponent's continued mocking of him, and as the bloodlust gathered in his eyes, he attempted to kick Mercenary Tao away. Tao's response was to slap the offending appendage away and brought his elbow down on Zabuza's knee with such force his leg bent at a painful angle. Grunting as pain shot up his leg, he was assaulted by a flurry of punches and elbow strikes that were aimed directly at his lungs, his throat, and his solar plexus, all of which were done for the sole purpose of knocking the breath out of Zabuza. Due to the damage done to his leg, Zabuza was hit by the strikes, and he gasped out for breath as he was forced to kneel from the pain in his leg. Mercenary Tao smirked down evilly at Zabuza and lashed out with a quick kick to the temple, causing Zabuza to slam face first into the ground. Before Zabuza could get up, the assassin proceeded to pick up Kubikirabauchi with one hand and tossed it into the lake like it was nothing more than unwanted garbage. Upon seeing this, Zabuza was filled with rage and slammed Mercenary Tao to the floor, assaulting him with stomps. Tao proceeded to grab Zabuza's foot and snapped it painfully to the side, then threw Zabuza into the direction of the lake. You seem to have gotten rusty during your time as a Nukenin, Mamachi-chan. Either that or your reputation is highly overrated. Whatever the case may be, you're worthless garbage, Tao commented to the so-called demon in a scornful manner. Growling in an enraged manner, both from the words his opponent constantly threw at him, as well as the way the fight was going, he had decided that enough was enough. He had yet to see a single jutsu or any sign of chakra be used by his opponent, so he had assumed that his enemy didn't know how to use it. So, getting an idea, he quickly retreated to the middle of the lake and started forming hand seals. You've put up a decent fight so far, but I have a bridge builder to kill, so I lend this right now, Zabuza called out, going through his hand seal sequence and acting as if he had the match in the bag. Mercenary Tao, upon seeing how long he was taking to form what was clearly the Suiton Suiton no Jutsu, he had felt that it was time he put an end to this little match of theirs. Chuckling to himself, Mercenary Tao stuck out his finger, which started to glow. Dodonpa fire. He called out before a thin, deadly fast beam rocketed towards Zabuza. Since he was too busy forming hand seals for his water dragon attack, he was thus unable to avoid the technique. As his life flashed before his eyes, Mercenary Tao's signature attack just cruised on past him and hit something in the trees. Caught off guard over being alive, he had decided to mock the mercenary. I have no idea what technique it was you used, but it seems you need more practice. You didn't even come close to hitting me, amateur Zabuza mocked, deeply enjoying his turn at doing the mocking for once. However, Mercenary Tao didn't seem worried in the slightest. In fact, all he did was start laughing. Irritated over this sudden outburst of laughter, Zabuza snapped out at his infuriating opponent. What the hell is so funny? He snapped out at the blonde mercenary. I wasn't aiming for you. I was aiming for your masked friend in the trees, was all he said, which caused Zabuza's eyes to widen as a masked figure fell out of the trees and into the lake, quickly sinking beneath the waves. As Zabuza turned to look at his precious tool, his eyes bulged out in shock when he saw a perfectly circular hole going clear through the mask, through Haku's head, and out of the other side. The sight shocked him so much that it actually caused him to momentarily stop his hand seal sequence. Naturally, this hesitation was capitalized on by Mercenary Tao. Dodonpa fire. He called out again, firing one of his prized techniques at Zabuza. The demon of the hidden mist realized only too late what happened, and all he could do was turn around and watch as the energy beam pierced through his heart. Letting out a blood-filled gargle, the demon of the mist fell face first into the lake and sunk with his partner into the waves. Grinning evilly over what had just transpired, he quickly dove in after his two victims and proceeded to retrieve their bodies. He then pulled out one of his modified sealing scrolls, unraveled them, and sealed away the bodies and the sword of the two Kurigakure fugitives. With that said and done, he pocketed his scroll and turned back to a shell-shocked Tazuna. Well then, old man, I believe it's time we get you home, he asked the bridge builder, which caused him to nod his head rapidly and quickly lead the man to his home where his daughter and grandson were. Meanwhile, in Gato's hideout. Some demon of the hidden mist he is. Toothless worm is more like it, Gato mocked Zabuza after finding out that he and his masked apprentice had been slain before he was silenced by the arrival of another Kurigakure ninja. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a long mane of red hair and a shark-like grin filled with sharpened teeth. Strapped to this person's side appeared to be two katanas. So, Zabuza has failed, has he? I wonder who was capable of such a feat. Whoever it is should prove to be a fine meal, perhaps the finest there is. Rest assured, Gato-san, that this fine meal will be devoured and you'll have your bridge builder, came the sultry chuckle of the redeeted Kunoichi in the room before she then stepped out of the light and then seemingly vanished. After a while of traveling, Mercenary Tao and Tazuna arrived at the bridge builder's home. A surprisingly sober Tazuna walked up to the door and knocked on the door. Tao's sensitive hearing picked up the sound of footsteps approaching the door from inside of the home, and just as soon as the footsteps stopped, the door opened, revealing an attractive young lady standing there. Mercenary Tao looked her up and down, placing her as nothing more than a housewife, and considering the expression on Tazuna's face, it appeared that he knew her. The fond smile on his face was what gave it away, after all. The woman, in return, smiled in a relieved manner and hugged Tazuna tightly. Tao curled his lips up in disgust at the soft display of affection, but stayed silent, allowing the two their little moment. Once the two separated, the woman spoke up. "Tao-san, I'm glad to see you're safe. Did you get those Konoha ninja like you said you would?" The housewife, who was now identified as Tazuna's daughter, spoke up to the bridge builder. Tazuna just sighed and rubbed his eyes. His daughter immediately picked up on the sadness her Tao-san was feeling and looked at him with a depressed frown. Naturally, the woman did not seem to notice the exceptionally deadly mercenary Tao standing close by to her father. Tao wasn't surprised in the slightest, as it just showcased how utterly moronic and oblivious untrained civilians could be. "What's wrong, Tao-chan? Are they not coming?" she asked her father with a surprised expression. While not necessarily super knowledgeable about how ninja worked in general, people from all over the elemental nations held at least some passive knowledge in how helpful and people-friendly Konoha was, always willing to lend aid to other countries. The fact that they would just leave the people of Nami no Kuni to their fate was something that didn't make sense to the civilian woman in the slightest. "They were going to come, but when they figured out I lied about the mission details, even after I told them what was going, they decided to just leave me to my fate," Tazuna said, pulling the brim of his hat down. Tsunami's eyes started to water and she appeared ready to faint at the thought of losing another person that she loved dearly. Tazuna, upon seeing the reaction his precious daughter had to what he said, quickly spoke up to try and get rid of her sadness. "Stay calm, Tsunami, because our people still have hope. This is Mercenary Tao and he's decided to help us out and he is damn good. I was attacked by one of the ninja Gato hired and Tao just wiped the floor with him and his accomplice. So long as he's around, our troubles should be over," Tazuna said quickly, pointing to his left and revealing the semi-unknown assassin to Tsunami. Tao, upon hearing this, just sighed to himself. Great, just what he needed, to be revered upon by weaklings who cowered over the very mention of Gato's name. At least he'll wind up getting paid from this job one day, so he would do his best and keep his patience. Tsunami turned to look at the proclaimed mercenary and looked at him with widened eyes. Although she could tell that he was obviously still a teenager, she could still tell that the pink-wearing assassin was a very deadly person. His outfit pretty much screamed murderer after all, and the coldness in his eyes just further reinforced that this young man was not someone that was to be messed with. Tsunami's face paled just a tad bit as she looked at him, which Tao noticed and responded to by smirking at her in an amused manner. Trying to hide her nervousness, Tsunami swallowed her fear and spoke up. "Greetings, Tao-san. I appreciate you risking your life to help us get free of Gato's tyranny," Tsunami stuttered out a bit as she bowed to him in gratitude. Mercenary Tao didn't bother bowing back as that was a sign of respect and he didn't respect this woman in the least. He simply kept his arms folded behind his back and scoffed at her. Did she really think he was doing what he was doing to help them? He couldn't care less about the troubles these weaklings had, the only reason he was doing this was for his own monetary benefit. Had he not been hired by the Tsuchi no Kuni daimyo, he might have wound up working for Gato instead. The only reason he chose not to kill Tazuna was because it was bad business sense to help the person your client asked you to kill. "I'm not doing it to help you, I'm doing this for my own monetary benefit. Your problems are insignificant to me, and the only reason I helped out at all was because I saw a business opportunity in helping out your Tao-san. Don't think of me as some hero, because I'm not here to save you all out of the goodness of my heart," he said in a condescending manner, grunting at her and turning his nose up at her. Nothing disgusted him more than the thought of people viewing him as some hero who would swoop in, solve everyone's problems, and then give out free love and hugs to make everyone feel better. The mere thought of Mercenary Tao being such a goody-goody almost made him gag. Tsunami's eyes hardened over as she heard the way that Tao spoke to her, and the mercenary could tell that the woman would have liked nothing more than to hurl insults at him, force him away, and maybe even hit him. However, judging by the sweat he noticed gathering on her brow, he could tell that she was still very much afraid of him and took that to mean that she was too afraid to ever try to do anything with him. She was a smart woman for holding herself back because he would have felt no qualms about ending her life should she ever attempt such an abysmally foolish idea. Instead, Tsunami had swallowed once more and bowed to him once more. "Even so, I thank you for choosing to take the job we wanted the Konohagakure ninja to take. I promise on behalf of Nami no Kuni that we'll find a way to pay you back when we are able to," Tsunami said to him after she stood up from her bow. Tao sneered at her and merely pushed her out of the way so that he may enter the house and get settled in, his arm placing itself back into a fist as it was folded behind his back once more. Tazuna caught Tsunami as she almost fell to the floor and after helping her to steady herself, the two of them glared at Tao. While he may be helping them, they were far from happy over having him with them. As Mercenary Tao entered the house, he proceeded to look over his shoulder at the two. I will be staying here and I won't pay a dime because you can consider my protecting your worthless hide to be payment enough, Tazuna. After all, so long as Gato still lives, your life will still be in danger, Tao said to them for a moment before continuing on his way into the house with Tazuna and Tsunami following in after him, closing the door behind. Tazuna sat down at the kitchen table and started partaking in some sake, and Tsunami attended to some pot that was being cooked on a stove. Tao, meanwhile, sat down and started undergoing deep meditation. However, that meditation didn't last long, as just after all three of them got into place, Tazuna spoke up to the assassin. All we have to do is finish the bridge and Gato will lose his iron grip on the country. Even if Gato isn't killed, we'll still be free, Tazuna said to Tao in response to his comment about Gato still being a danger. The mercenary scoffed, finding that line of thinking utterly stupid. The worthless fool was just an innocent civilian after all, and as such, he was unable to see the flaws in that train of thought. Well, Tao did believe that there was nothing Gato or anyone else could do to stop the mercenary from completing his objective. He already knew of things that could be done to stop Tazuna, aside from killing him. That's where you're wrong, you incompetent moron. So long as Gato lives, he is still a threat. So long as he has money, he can keep sending assassins after you. If Gato was desperate enough, he could just have his thugs set up explosives all over the bridge, blow up your giant heap of scrap metal, and then leave your people completely and totally crushed. There are many ways he could still defeat you without killing you, so long as he lives. You're just lucky that Gato is too damn stupid to go with such a plan, Tao scoffed at Tazuna, which caused Tsunami and the bridge builder to pale in shock once they realized he was right. Right as the conversation ended, the front door to the house opened up and in walked a small boy. Tao glanced at the boy and raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Judging by the facial expressions of Tazuna and Tsunami, it was someone they knew, most likely another blood relative. Taking a closer look at the boy, Tao could see the despair, the helplessness, the utterly crushed hope and defeat in his eyes. Seeing such a thing caused the mercenary to smirk in amusement. Seeing such misery and defeat in such a small boy reminded me of some of the kills he had made over his career. "Achin, I'm back," came the voice of the boy. When he got to the kitchen, he blinked in surprise when he noticed Tazuna sitting there. The boy's face lit up with a smile and he ran over to greet the bridge builder. Ah, so this boy happened to be Tazuna's grandson, was he? How nauseatingly quaint. Tao quietly placed his arms on the table and underwent his meditation once again, and before he could truly get into it, the boy seemed to notice his presence. "Who's this?" the boy asked in a suspicious tone of voice. Ah, the distrust, the suspicion, such a thing being shown by a child was quite amusing. The despair Gato dished out on this country must have messed the boy up something good. Either that, or there was a story he was missing. Regardless of what the reason, Tao found the boy's surly disposition rather amusing. It reminded me of the children that would hunt him down and try to get revenge for what he did to their families. He enjoyed the rage on their faces right before he could cut them down. As his thoughts turned darker, his amused smirk widened just that tad bit. Sadly, his thoughts were interrupted when Tazuna spoke up to his grandson. "Inari, this is Mercenary Tao. He's been hired to assassinate Gato, and he's decided to be my bodyguard in exchange for payment when we are able to pay him back," came the voice of Nami no Kuni's bridge builder, introducing his grandson to the pink-garbed assassin. "He's going to die, Sofu. You should just tell him to just give up and run away while he can," was what Inari said in reply to his oldest family member, the whining rather obvious. Mercenary Tao's nostrils flared in an irritated manner. Did this little brat just insinuate that Gato would kill him, of all people, deciding to teach this little boy a lesson? Blonde-haired, blue-eyed mercenary quietly slid out of his seat and proceeded to loom over Inari menacingly, with his eyes narrowed into a menacing glare. Though there was no killing intent radiating from him, the mere presence of the assassin standing over him like he was caused the boy to whiten and shake with fear. Getting the reaction he expected from the boy, his lips curled up into a dark sneer, looking down at Inari the way someone would look down at a pesky fly or mosquito. The whole house became tense, no one made a single sound, and all three occupants of the house all stared at the assassin with nervousness and dread on their faces. None of the three people in the house dared to move for fear of provoking the sadistic mercenary. Whereas some people would stop there and be satisfied with the sense of dread they had instilled in someone that dared to doubt their skills, Tao decided to take it a step further. He slowly placed his right arm in front of his body and pointed his index finger at Inari with a dark malicious gleam in his eyes. Tazuna, knowing what the man could do with his finger, tried with all of his might to shield Inari, but the fear kept him held in place. "So, you think some short pudgy little midget can kill me, do you, boy? You fear Gato, do you? Well then, let's see if that fear of him lasts after this," Mercenary Tao said. However, there was something interesting about his index finger. It wasn't carrying the typical glow that one would associate with his signature Dodonpa attack. However, that didn't mean his finger wasn't dangerous, as Tao was a freak of nature when it came to hand-to-hand combat, and he had the ability to use even just a single finger to deal massive damage to someone. In a flash, the man now called Tao launched his finger forward and proceeded to impale it through Inari's abdomen, which caused Tazuna to shout in surprise, Tsunami to faint, and Inari to gasp out in pain. With a satisfied gleam in his eyes, Tao removed his finger from the hole in Inari's abdomen and quickly wiped off the blood with a tablecloth. As Inari fell to the floor from having been knocked unconscious from the pain, Tazuna quickly raced to attend to Inari, and Tao merely just went upstairs and quickly searched for the room that was his. He didn't worry about Inari dying, as due to his knowledge on human anatomy, he made sure to pierce through the brat's abdomen in a way that would ensure that he just lost some blood. He would have a large hole-shaped scar when it healed, and he would remember the pain of having a finger pierced through his body for a long time, but he would live. Time skip. It was late at night, 12 AM in fact, and everyone else other than Tao was asleep. Due to some connections he had undergone a special body modification process that would allow him to operate at maximum efficiency with as little sleep as possible, which is why he was up at this time, since he had already gotten all the sleep he needs for the day. Wearing dark blue nightwear and a pair of slippers, he had decided to make his way to a rundown bar to have a drink. The bar was filled with a bunch of bandits who appeared to take no notice of him, preferring to continue what they were doing before he had decided to walk into the bar. "What will you have?" the bartender asked gruffly. Tapepai ordered the strongest alcohol they had and proceeded to pull out Ryo from the wallet he had. Of course, doing so had resulted in two bandits taking notice of the vast amount of money he seemed to be carrying with him, and they grinned to each other as they quietly discussed a plan that involved ambushing him. Unfortunately for them, Mercenary Tao's excellent hearing allowed him to pick up the plan being discussed and easily picked out the two in question as he sipped at his drink. While Tao wasn't an alcoholic or anything, he still enjoyed having a drink every now and then. He would never allow himself to get drunk, of course, but he would always drink just enough to get a slight buzz, strong enough to feel some effect, but light enough that would allow him to still perform at optimal efficiency. After he had downed his glass, he proceeded to push the glass towards the bartender and walked out of the bar with his fists folded formally behind his back. Predictably, the two bandits who were planning on mugging him for his money followed after him, one wielding a crossbow and the other wielding a spear. Mercenary Tao heard the obnoxiously loud footsteps of the two bandits following after him and paid them no mind. They weren't really worth his time unless they decided to go through with that foolish little plan of theirs. "Hey you, with the braided ponytail. Hand over your wallet and everything else of value you have on you," commanded the voice of the bandit that wielded the crossbow. Mercenary Tao heard the command but did not react to them at all. No change of facial expression, no verbal comment, no turning to face them, he didn't even stop walking. He simply continued his path back to Tazuna's house, not even bothering to acknowledge the worthless imbeciles. The two bandits growled at him and once again tried to get his attention. "Are you deaf or something, you ugly, mustachioed bastard? Hand over your valuables this time," the bandit with the spear commanded him, and yet again, Mercenary Tao did not bother acknowledging them. The bandits, who already had short fuses as it was, snapped after the man seemed to ignore them and just kept walking away from him. The bandit with the spear nodded his head to the bandit with the crossbow, and that caused the bandit to aim said weapon at the blonde-haired mercenary. With a pull of the lever, he fired a deadly fast crossbow bolt at Tao. Yet, it seemed as if Mercenary Tao did not hear the discharge of the bolt as he merely kept walking away. Or at least, so it seemed to the bandits. In reality, Tao had heard the pulling of the lever, the sound of the bolt being fired, the whistling of the bolt flying through the air, and the whistling of the wind that alerted him to the oncoming attack. Without even bothering to stop walking, as he lifted his left leg open to bring it forward, he flung his foot backwards, causing the slipper to slide off of it and be launched up into the air at such speeds that it perfectly intercepted the bolt. As the bolt slammed into the floating slipper, the force of impact from the two objects colliding had caused the bolt to be ricochet off of the slipper and be propelled backwards at the bandit that fired the bolt. Before either bandit had time to react, the bolt impaled itself through the crossbow-wielding bandit's throat. With a single gurgle of death, the bandit fell over dead. When the slipper was hit, it was propelled forward over the still walking Tao's shoulder and fell to the ground in front of Tao right at the moment where he moved his left leg again, causing him to slide his socked foot into the slipper. He did that without even breaking his stride in the slightest, and he didn't even bother to make any acknowledgement of what he had done. The bandit wielding the spear was completely shell-shocked for a moment as to what just happened, but broke out of his stupor long enough to let out a curse and charge at the blue-eyed assassin with his spear pointed forward. His move was obvious, he was attempting to impale the spear through Tao's back. Naturally, Tao showed no indication that he was aware of what the bandit was doing, but he was. Right when it seemed like the bandit was going to be successful in his attempt, Mercenary Tao blurred out of sight in a burst of speed, reappeared to the bandit's right side, and proceeded to catch the spear by pinching it between his left thumb and index fingers in an underhanded position. The bandit growled and did his best to try and get the spear free, but despite Tao only gripping it with 2 fingers, the spear remained unmoving. The bandit proceeded to stare into the cold, menacing blue eyes of the blonde assassin, and it was at that moment that he realized just what he had gotten into. While still holding onto the tip of the spear with only 2 fingers, he proceeded to twist his hand upside down, making sure to sweep the flat end of the spear up against the bandit's chest, and this caused him to hold the spear high up in the air, with the bandit laying horizontally on the flat end of it. Before the bandit could even make a sound, Tao pulled back on the spear for a moment and then quickly drove the pole end of the spear forward with such speed that it pierced straight through the bandit's chest and sheared his lungs off. With a smirk on his face, he stabbed the spear into the ground and let the bandit left on that pole, suspended in the air and dying in a short amount of seconds. Unknown to Tao, he was being watched by someone in the trees, and that person in the trees liked what she saw. She grinned a toothy, sharp-toothed grin of delight over seeing just a small taste of what this mysterious new protector of Tazuna could do. She knew of Mercenary Tao, all ninja with a bounty on their heads, made it a habit of learning the names of reputable bounty hunters, and she had plenty of things about him. Only hearing about him did not do him justice, it seems. She had a feeling that she was going to deeply enjoy fighting him. It had been about a week and a half since Mercenary Tao and Tazuna had entered Nami no Kuni, and things were tense in the household. Inari had grown deathly afraid of Tao and often refused to be alone with him. Although, after that violent episode Tao had with the boy, he had since gone quiet and had yet to utter another word about how the blonde-haired assassin was gonna die by Gato's hands, which was perfectly fine with Mercenary Tao. That's what he had intended to do, make sure the boy that would never let such filthy garbage spill from his miserable lips again. Perhaps the boy, even though of him being more terrifying than Gato, which would tickle Tao's fancy quite a bit. Tsunami showed thinly veiled hostility towards him, the memory of what he did to her son, forever earning him a spot on her hated people list. Whether or not he ranked higher on her list than Gato remained to be seen, though, as the woman was still too terrified of him to try and do something to him. She was smarter than most, because if she did try something, he would have slain her where she stood, regardless of what Tazuna and Inari's thoughts on the matter were. So long as the woman retained her common sense and realized that messing with him was a bad idea, he would be perfectly happy to let her live. Tazuna outright loathed him, though, saying he was worse than Gato. The comment just made Tao smirk in amusement, treating it fully as a compliment. Yes, he fully believed that he was worse than Gato, and he had no issue with being seen as worse than him. He had a reputation to uphold, after all, and he wasn't the type of person to deny the fact that he was a monster. He took pride in such a thing, but he truly believed that what put him above other monsters was his sense of business. Every day, he guarded Tazuna while he did his work on the bridge, and all seemed well, but Mercenary Tao constantly had this feeling that he was being watched. His senses always picked up that someone was nearby, watching him, but he couldn't figure out who it was. The scent he was picking up smelled vaguely of rainwater, and was that apples he smelled. It was interesting, but wholly unfamiliar to the mercenary, although he could tell that they were most certainly female. Whoever it belonged to, he knew for a fact that they were following him, and he deduced that, whoever they were observing him. They weren't really learning a whole lot, as all the times they had observed him, he hadn't really shown off anything truly unique. Whatever their reason was for observing him, though, was something that was completely unknown to him. Nevertheless, he was suspicious of this unknown person that seemed to be following him every time he was out and about. During all the times they had been following him, he had been guarding Tazuna, and he had yet to encounter a single problem so far. However, that was all about to change today. As Tao waited for everyone to go about their morning routines, he took Tazuna to the bridge to do his work. When they got there, though, they discovered that someone had butchered almost all of the workers. Tazuna went chalk-wide and retched over the side of the bridge, at the sight of the mutilated bodies. Tao, on the other hand, barely batted an eye. Examining the corpses slowly, he raked his eyes over their forms and took notice of the sword wounds. The wounds themselves are obvious from a blade of some kind, but there's also these curious burns so close to the wounds, Tao thought to himself as he looked over the wounds. There appeared to be burns of some kind on the wounds, but they obviously weren't fire burns. His sensitive nose twitched as it picked up the peculiar scent on each of the victims. These are electricity burns, most likely from some kind of Ratan-based weapon, the mercenary thought to himself once more. That was when his nose picked up that scent again, the obviously female scent that had the stench of rainwater and apples. Narrowing his eyes, he took notice of the mist that started permeating the area. HMPH, another Kurigakure ninja, I see. I wonder if it's another Shinobagatana member, he thought to himself with a smirk on his face. Suddenly, he detected movement in the mist, and whoever the movement belonged to, they were clearly heading towards Tazuna. Quickly sliding a throwing knife into his hand from his right sleeve, he threw the blade with extreme speed towards where the sound came from. In a flash, he noticed an odd squelch sound and then heard a sound of what sounded like water splashing on the bridge floor. Ah, so it was another Mizubunshin, marvelous. Then there was a silence for a few moments before it was then broken by a sultry chuckle that came from right in his ear. I finally get to cross blades with you, Mercenary Tao. How joyous, said the voice right in his ear, but considering Tao did not sense a presence behind him, he didn't bother acknowledging the person that spoke to him. Just like the scent, the voice was clearly female in nature, and it caused him to narrow his eyes. He didn't bother with the usual banter yet, not until he knew who it was that he was facing off in battle today. Suddenly, his ears picked up movement heading straight towards him. Picking up the sound of a blade slicing through the wind coming from his right, he quickly jumped above the offending blade and proceeding to bend his leg backwards to kick it in that direction. The result was his foot slamming into the face of the person who tried to slice him in two. As he landed, he felt the ground beneath him wet with water again, and his left eye twitched when he realized it was another Mizubunshin. Still, the person had yet to show herself to him, and although he could pick up her scent and move towards her at any time, he felt that he could easily handle anything this woman could throw at him. Figuring himself to be her superior in every way, he kept his arms folded behind his back and allowed her to control the flow of battle for now. He narrowed his eyes when he detected multiple presences around him. He quickly pulled a throwing knife out from his sleeve, held out the hand that contained the throwing knife, and then spun around quickly, which caused him to hack through the Mizubunshins with ease. The voice spoke up once more, and his annoyance spiked up, but he did not let her know that he was aware of where she was, instead preferring to play around just a tad bit. Hiding weapons inside of your sleeves, that is actually an ingenious idea. I'm impressed so far, Tao, but since my Mizubunshin aren't up to the task, I suppose you should meet the real deal, said the voice, and in a flash, the woman carrying the scent of rainwater and apples was in front of him, swinging a pair of blades at him. A little caught off guard by the speed, he jumped backwards just enough to avoid receiving a fatal injury by the blades. Of course, they still cut two fairly deep wounds in his stomach that started to bleed, and he felt the sting of lightning course through his body for that very short second that the blades had made contact with his flesh. Hissing in annoyance, he made sure to get out of reach of the woman's blades and took the time to beep-eyes her. Upon looking her over, Tao's eyebrows rose up into his hairline when he recognized that of the strongest Shinobigatana Nonanishu member, that of Amayuri Ringo. S-rank Nin, wielder of the twin Kiba blades, killed more than half of the Mizukage's elite troops and wounded Yugura himself with a deep scar across the eye before fleeing Kurigakure after she was heavily wounded by said Mizukage. She was one of the most wanted criminals in the world and she was to be his opponent. Mercenary Tao grinned at the thought of facing her in combat, and he knew immediately that he would have to give it his all. He had fought a number of ninja in his time, but this would be the first time he would cross blades with an S-rank ninja. Well, Amayuri Ringo, the strongest of the Shinobigatana Kurigakure organization. I admit, I did not expect to see you here. Let me guess, Zabuza and his masked accomplice were minions of yours, Mercenary Tao said to Amayuri in a snide manner. The swordswoman in question grinned a predatory grin at him and nodded her head in the affirmative. After that little exchange, she lunged at Tao and attempted to bring her electrified twin blades down on top of the semi-known assassin. In response to this, Tao quickly drew his blade from its sheath and with just one hand clutching tightly on the hilt, he clashed his curiously white blade against hers and causing sparks to fly among them. He felt some minor strain as their blades clashed, and while the Kiba wielder's strength was impressive, Tao's strength was massive due to his heavy focus on hand-to-hand combat, and because of that, he was capable of holding her back. Amayuri pressed down tightly on his curiously white blade, her shark-like teeth grinding together as she tried to slice through his blade. Something was wrong, her Kiba blades were the sharpest blades in the entire world, they should have been able to cut through his own blade, and on top of that, he wasn't being electrocuted by the powerful lightning flowing through her blades. Genuinely curious about this, she grunted out a statement as she twisted her body around to avoid his kick and then spun away from him. My blades should have easily cut through your sword and you should have blasted by the electrical charges going through my blades. That sword of yours isn't a metal blade, is it? She asked him before darting forward and then performing a clockwise spin with her sword sprayed out to her left. Tao quickly brought up his blade and blocked her blades with his own and then sent her spinning with his exponential strength. Rather than being knocked off balance from being sent spinning, the female Shinobigatana member easily kept her footing and took advantage of the spin to try and cut into him, this time with her sword's blade out to the right. Tao was quick to defend himself by darting backwards away from the blades and then lashed out with a punch at the left side of her cheek, which snapped her head to the side and sent her spinning backwards and away from him. How astute of you, Kurigakure garbage. This sword is a Kagaya bone sword, made out of one of the bones of the late Kagaya patriarch, and not only are Kagaya blades indestructible, they're also made of bone, and bone doesn't conduct electricity, he said in reply, blurring out of sight and reappearing behind in a burst of speed as he attempted to slash all the way down through her spine. Mayuri seemed to have realized where he disappeared to and managed to lunge forward enough to avoid getting a crippling injury, though there was now a deep gouge going through her back that ripped the back of her shirt in two. Feeling the sting of the wound, she let out a hiss, not one of pain, but one of enjoyment, because she finally had an enjoyable opponent to fight in a long while, ever since she abandoned Kurigakure. That is quite a find, Tao. Lucky you. Interested in sating my curiosity by telling me where you acquired it? She asked with a cheeky grin on her face, spinning around and using the momentum and to send her forward at her opponent. She slashed at Tao once as she spun, then stopped mid-momentum, spun the other way to slash at him again, spun back the other way to slash at him again, then repeated the cycle until she had thrown a total of more than 30 slashes in the span of a mere 3 seconds. Her spins and movements were so quick that it legitimately looked like that a miniature tornado was forming around her with every spin she performed. Tao's response to this was to quickly bring up his sword and deflect each blow she threw at him as he skillfully glided with nimble feet across the bridge, making sure to be mindful of his surroundings so that she doesn't trap him up against a wall. While Tao most certainly had the strength to outmatch her and incredible speed to go along with it, Mayuri was very nimble and wasn't giving him to fully incorporate his strength behind his blows. That being said, it was clear to tell that the Redeed wasn't giving it her all, and to be honest, Tao wasn't doing his absolute best, either. As the two exchanged blows with their blades, they appeared to dance across the bridge, their forms a fuzzy blur as Mayuri slowly pushed Tao around the bridge. Maybe I'll tell you as you lay dying at my feet. After all, dead women tell no tales, Tao retorted in a snide manner as the androgynous former Kurigakure Kunoichi jumped onto the guardrail of the bridge to give herself more height and managed to perform a very acrobatic spin on the very guardrail and tried to slash at him once more while maintaining perfect balance. Tao quickly ducked underneath the slash and then managed to strike her in the stomach with the hilt his bone sword before headbutting her in the chest and then sweep kicking her off of her feet. Mayuri took the full brunt of the attacks, and if she were a lower ranked member, then she would have normally fell back first onto the guardrail. However, she was a full-blown S-rank ninja, and she quickly spun herself away from Tao horizontally in the air, sliding the blade in her right hand into her left and then stopping herself by performing a one-handed handstand on the guardrail with her now free hand. She then slammed down feet first onto the guardrail, slid her other sword back into her free hand, then lunged at Mercenary Tao and attempted an X-shaped cross-lash on Tazuna's bodyguard. The pink-garbed assassin quickly spun away from the attack and jumped onto the guardrail. He then lunged at her and assaulted her with a barrage with quick, fencing thrusts of the blade, also showing incredible balance on the thin guardrail. The mistress of the silent killing technique quickly sprinted backwards as she twisted and turned her body around to avoid the thrusts of his blade before striking him in the face with the hilt of her left kiba blade, and while it stunned him for a split second, it barely did more than that. However, that split second was all she needed as she quickly assaulted his chest with a spinning slash of her blades. Tao managed to recover in time to avoid the attack, but unfortunately for him, she managed to cut across his left arm, enough to leave profusely bleeding deep gouges in it, and he grit his teeth as the lightning on the blades coursed through him and shocked his system. Such arrogance, how manly of you, Tao. The meal grows more delicious by the second, she retorted with a shark-like grin, to which led to him growling in irritation as he jumped off of the guardrail and attempted to slash her feet off of her legs. Mayuri, though, chuckled and proceeded to jump to avoid the blade before letting out a cry as she attempted to crash her blades down on top of him again. Tao let out an irritated tch sound and glided to the side much like water to avoid the attack she threw at him, and in a blur of speed, he appeared behind her and managed to shove his sword through her chest, which caused her to let out a rasping cough. However, when Mayuri collapsed into a puddle of water, Tao narrowed his eyes as he realized that she used the Kawarimi no Jutsu to swap out in time with a Mizubunshin. He didn't admit it out loud, but Mayuri so far had been the strongest opponent so far. Even against ninjas, Tao had rarely come across an opponent so fierce. He hadn't noticed any Mizubunshin because his focus was entirely on the S-rank nuke nin. Thankfully, it seemed that she had felt that keeping her Mizubunshin so close to Tao wasn't a good idea and seemed to be keeping however many she had left out of range. Waiting patiently and ignoring the bleeding come from the wounds he had received at her so far, his nostrils flared when he picked up the scent of Mayuri behind him. Spinning quickly, he kicked her away and slashed at her with his bone sword, causing her to receive a deep cut that went down diagonally from her right shoulder down to her left hip. So, that made it her 2 wounds to his 4, then. In a flash, she vanished back into the mist, this time coming to the side of him. Darting backwards quickly to avoid the downward slice, he hit her in the chin with a high kick and then kicked her hard into the nearby guardrail. Trying to capitalize while he had the chance, he flung a throwing knife that he aimed directly at her skull. There was another squelch-like sound effect and he grit his teeth in irritation when he realized that it was yet another Mizubunshin. So, she was back to trying the silent killing technique again, was she? This was just getting annoying for the underworld assassin, as this is the first time he had to ever really struggle. He was about fed up with this woman and was prepared to unleash hell upon her until he heard her speak up. Well, as much fun as this has been, my tasty meal, I've grown just a tad weary of this and so it's time to goodbye to your earthly bonds. Ikazuchi no Kiba. Was what she had called out to Tao as she drew her swords together and summoning a lightning current and attempting to summon a lightning strike down upon Tao. Widening his eyes just a bit, he proceeded to dart across the bridge, barely avoiding the lightning strikes that she was summoning from the sky. Every time he avoided a lightning strike, he heard the echoing voice of the hidden Amauri, who seemed to be able to keep track of him, as he was able to keep track of her. Deciding to get creative, he let out a scream as he gathered his energy into his hand and managed to deflect one of the bolts right back at its creator. Tao didn't get off scot-free, though, as his left hand became deeply burned by the attack. The hidden Amauri was caught off guard by the deflection and was struck with such force by the bolt of lightning that she slammed forcefully into the crane of the bridge, sliding down with an echoing thud as her body smoked from the power of the lightning. Letting out a cough, she staggered back to her feet, only to find that Tao was already on the approach. Sprinting at his incredible speed so he could cleave her in half at the hips. Widening her eyes, she quickly placed her Kiba blades into the air and gathered her chakra. Raido Jutsu. Rakurai. She called out, summoning a bolt of lightning down onto her right when Tao was so close to hitting her. The result was the bolt of lightning chakra summoned a powerful shockwave that slammed with incredible force into Tao and sending him skipping and sliding down the bridge. Growing more and more enraged as the fight went on, he staggered back to his feet and quickly gathered his kai into his eyes. "Toke on your own blood, you androgynous trash. Saumason." He shouted back at her, firing a pair of thin beams from his eyes at Amauri's lungs. The surprise maneuver only allowed her to ensure that she didn't take any fatal damage, though the beams did pierce through the right side of her collarbone and through her right bicep due to the way she dodged, causing her to feel searing pain. The two of them panted as they glared at each other, the fatigue starting to set in just a bit. Pitch black, predatory black orbs met predatory sapphire blue orbs, a spark of intensity forming between their eyes. Neither giving an inch, daring the other to make the first move. Sooner or later, one of them had to break the stare and go on the move, or else they would be here forever. Al was starting to feel the blood loss and the loss of feeling in parts of his body from the electrocution damage, and Amauri was also losing quite a bit of blood. "You're the toughest meal I've ever had to work for, Tao. You've put up an admirable fight so far, it's been a long time since I've fought someone who could stand up to me. Such a shame you're going to die here and now with that bridge builder, as I'd actually like to face you again. Such a shame that your path ends here. Raiden. Sandagetto." She said as she used the strength necessary to stab her swords into the metal bridge, then fired twin bolts of lightning into the sky. Before Tao could react, a powerful bolt of lightning struck the ground and sent out a massive shockwave that Tao only barely had time to bring up his arms and defend against the attack, forming a protective shell of energy around himself. There was a flash of white and he was then consumed by the powerful technique, slamming forcefully into Tazuna and protecting him from the blast. As Amauri panted, she waited for the blast zone to clear and when everything cleared up, she saw Mercenary Tao slowly stagger back to his feet. He had seen better days, with his striking outfit having been destroyed and leaving him clad only in his undergarments and shoes. Quite a bit of his body had been burned, the mustache on his lip singed off, and his beautiful hair had been burned off. Slowly standing up, Tao slowly uncrossed his arms and snarled at her, very thankful that his sword was still fine. The red-deeded swordswoman, when she saw this, widened her eyes when she saw that he had managed to survive one of her strongest attacks, a thick coat of sweat rolling down her and her panting increasing. Gritting his teeth as he snarled at her, Tao proceeded to smirk evilly at her and shakily formed his hands into the triangle formation. "You whore, you ruined my outfit and it was custom-made. Enjoy the afterlife, Kikoho." He shouted out, forming a super powerful square-shaped wave of energy that flew at the strongest member of the Shinobigatana Ninshu with such speed that she only had time to form a lightning-based barrier around her body to shield her from the blast. As the explosion sounded off and the smoke cleared, Amauri was stuck in a similar position as Mercenary Tao was. The both of them were on their last legs and they both fell to one knee. Yet, even though that they were nearly spent on energy, they still had enough in them to glare menacingly at each other. Slowly, ever so slowly, they staggered back to their feet and they were about to launch themselves at each other for one final attack before they noticed the mist that Amayuri had summoned up had dissipated. Well, look at we have here, boys. It seems we have ourselves some bones to pick dry, a snide voice commented on the situation, which caused the 2S ranked opponents to stiffen up and look around them. What they saw made them grit their teeth because on one side of the bridge, they had Gato and his gang of thugs, while on the other side, they had an entire Kurigakure Anbu team. Looking each other in the eye, they came to a silent understanding and pressed their backs together, an action that caused Amayuri to hiss in pain due to the deep gouge in her back. What's the meaning of this, Gato? Amayuri asked with her shark-like teeth as she pulled her swords out of the ground, which caused Gato to laugh in amusement. I had contacted the Mizukage about your location here in Nami no Kuni so I could sell you out to him and collect a bounty on both yourself and your little group of minions, and so Yagura had decided to send a full of Anbu under the promise that I allow Kurigakure Anbu to be stationed here and fund his village. However, I had chosen to have both my men and the Kurigakure Anbu stand back and wait until the time is right, which was when either one of you died and the other was left weakened, or when both of you were too weak to put up a fight. Now, I get rid of both the man after my head and collect your bounty as well, he said in reply, which caused the redeeted former Kurigakure Kunoichi to widen her eyes. As the two fighters examined their opponents, Amayuri proceeded to speak up to the man that had previously been her opponent. I think I have enough chakra left for one more jutsu in me. How about you, Meal? She asked Mercenary in between each pant she made, which caused Tao to narrow his eyes. Grab a hold of me, and when I say now, you use your strongest attack, do you understand? Tao asked her quietly with narrowed eyes, which caused Amayuri to grunt out the affirmative and turned to wrap her arms around his neck. Deciding that his life was more important than protecting Tazuna, he took a deep breath, gathered his kai, and flew up into the air to position himself in front of the sun. After sheathing his sword, he placed his hands in front of his face. Solar flare. He shouted as he closed his eyes, causing the sun to brighten up to inhuman levels, stunning and blinding the thugs, Gato, and the assembled Kurigakure Anbu team. Tao then quickly slammed back into the ground and gave Amayuri the signal, which caused her to pierce the ground with her kiba blades once more and used her Raiten Sandajeto Jutsu again, packing as much power as she could get away without killing herself from chakra exhaustion, resulting in everyone, including Tazuna, to be utterly obliterated by the attack. Once the smoke has cleared, everyone on the bridge had been vaporized, but Tao and Amayuri were nowhere to be seen, the kiba blade she wielded having vanished along with them. There was a small house in Kawa no Kuni, a lone figure resting in a bed. The pest was peaceful until the figure's eyes shot open and the man known as Mercenary Tao sat straight up in bed when the sound of an alarm clock sounded in his ears. Turning off the clock, he got out of his bed and noticed that the wounds and burns he had on his body had been healed. Looking down at himself with an eyebrow, he walked over to a mirror and ran a hand through his hair. He frowned when he noticed that it didn't seem burned at all and in fact seemed as good as new. Wondering what was going on, he looked down at the clothes on the desk in front of the mirror that even had a note sitting on top of it. It read as follows. Dear Tao. You and that Shinobigatana girl were awfully injured when I found you both collapsed on the ground and unconscious. While she was a cinch to heal up, you were much more difficult to heal, since your lack of chakra means I wasn't able to heal up the shinobi way. Thankfully, since I became your personal physician, I had learned numerous tricks with non-chakra based surgery and such to heal you up right quick. I even managed to shave your burnt hair off and got it to regrow good as new, and I even braided your hair into that ponytail style you like so much. Of course, the areas on your upper lip where the facial grew were so hideously that, even though I healed them up well enough for there to be no legitimate health issues, you are now unable to grow hair in that area. That Amayuri girl said she would wait for you to wake up as she appeared to have something to say to you. There's also a scroll with the seal of the K's no Kuni daimyo on it that appeared to be for you. It's underneath the clothes. Signed. Ryoham. P.S. I made you a brand new outfit that's an exact replica of the one that you lost. Tao smirked at the message and proceeded to set it alight to prevent anyone from getting a hold of it. After stamping the embers out, he proceeded to slip his clothes on, making sure to strap his sword to his back. He didn't even bother testing to see if the measurements were right, as his personal physician had long ago memorized the measurements of his body to be able to make perfectly fitting replicas of his outfit. Once that was done, he proceeded to look down at the scroll that apparently belonged to the K's no Kuni daimyo and narrowed his eyes when he saw the official seal belonging to said daimyo keeping the scroll sealed. Deciding to take a look and see what was up, he removed the seal on the scroll and opened up to look at the contents. The scroll read. Dear Mercenary Tao. I have heard through several reliable sources about your impressive mission record, your strength, and your loyalty to your employers. I have a mission for you that is of a very sensitive nature, one that can't be explained in this scroll due to fear of the message being discovered and the mission I have for you being discovered. I ask you to make your way to home with great haste as soon as you are able to come. Suffice to say, it is something that I don't trust anyone in my court to handle due to the fact I don't want anyone to know I was involved in it. If you come, you will be well paid, provided you are successful. Signed. The daimyo of Kei's no Kuni. Mercenary Tao raised an eyebrow over the contents of the scroll, finding himself completely and utterly intrigued over this supposedly super secret mission. However, he was very suspicious because this could very well likely be a trap and he was going to make sure he was prepared for that possibility. Making sure to burn the scroll and the seal of the Kei's no Kuni daimyo, he proceeded to stamp out the flames once more and then exited the small house. Immediately, he was hit with that familiar scent of rainwater and apples and he noticed that the scent was coming from above him. Instinctively, he quickly pulled out his bone sword and blocked the descending strike of Amayuri's electrified kiba blades. The two struggled for dominance for a moment before Tao pushed her back and away from him. However, rather than press the attack, Amayuri merely grinned a toothy grin at him and deactivated the electricity in her blades before sliding them back in their sheaths. Very wary of what she had planned, Tao quickly sheathed his blade and stared at her with narrowed eyes as he folded his arms behind his back, adopting his usual pose as he continued to glare at her. The glare on his face just widened the grin of the swordswoman with the dark red hair and for a moment they just stood there in silence before she broke the silence by speaking up. You're the first great fight I've had in a damned long time since I left Kurigakure and I've grown curious of you. One day, I want to have a rematch with you, Meal, and I'll make sure to bury you good and proper when the match is done. Amayuri spoke up to him with that wide, sharp-toothed grin still on her face. Upon hearing this, the semi-known assassin scoffed at her in a dismissive manner, not thinking much of what she had said. While she had done a decent job of facing him in their last match, he was sure that had they not been interrupted, he would have obliterated and taken the blades, as well as the life, of a second Shinobigatana member. If you're so eager to die and join your little misfit Kurigakure trash minions in the afterlife, then I'd be happy to grant your wish if you ever wind up being so foolish as to seek me out again. The only reason I haven't killed you now is because I have something more important to do. So I suggest you run along and go back to running from Yagura and his Anbu like a good little nukenin. He shot back at her before turning his back to her and walking up to a nearby tree, looking it up and down as he cupped his chin and started making calculations in his mind, trying to judge whether or not it would be good enough to use for his trip to Kei's no Kuni. There's that manly arrogance again, it's enough to make a girl weak in the knees. If you think you're going to get rid of me that easily, though, you're gravely mistaken. Amayuri spoke back with a slightly wider grin than before. Really, the man was so lackadaisical and attractively arrogant, oh so very deadly. She had certainly found an interesting one and he was someone that clearly didn't even use chakra. He appeared to be using some kind of energy, without a doubt, but she knew for a fact it wasn't chakra. She had no idea who it was that trained him, but whoever they were, they did a damn good job of it. She had to give her props to whoever this mysterious trainer of his was. Oh really? I presume you're going to be following after me, then? Would you still be able to follow me if I were cut your legs off? He asked her in an irritated fashion without bothering to turn around and face her, which had only caused her to chuckle in amusement. While most would be angry by the arrogance and the scornful dismissing they were being dealt at the hands of Tao, Amayuri just found the arrogance, as well as the threats of violence and death, both amusing and attractive. The closest person she ever got to someone like Tao was Kisame Hoshigaki, but she would never compare Tao to that accursed fishman. One of them was a smooth, hired assassin, and the other was a bloodthirsty psychopath who betrayed Kurigakure out of his own selfishness. I'd like to see you try that when I've already severed your head from your neck. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Tao, because I've taken an interest in you. When I get someone in my sights, I pursue them until I get what I want, and since you have the profession you do, I assume you'll be facing enemies that share a level of power with myself, and I would hate to lose out on the chance of getting my rematch and killing you, because someone already beat me to the punch. The redeeted Mizu, no Kuni-born Nukenin retorted back at him. Which just made him snort in a derisive manner, but considering that she pretty much said she was going to follow him and prevent others from killing him so that she could have the chance to do so herself, he felt there was no need to end her life just yet. After all, if she was going to go to the trouble of pursuing him to each end of the world he was in and ensure his survival just for a rematch, then she had her uses in his life, at least for now. That might change later on, but for now, he supposed there was no harm in letting her follow him. Judging by her personality, she wasn't the type to kill him while he was asleep, she wanted him to be wide awake and at full power and health, just for the pleasure of proving herself is better. That line of thinking reminded him perfect of himself, and for that, he had to admit, she had earned some of his respect. He certainly wouldn't let her know that, though. HMPH, well then, if you're going to ensure that I live just to have the pleasure of trying to kill me yourself, I suppose I should allow you to follow me. Just don't slow me down, or I'll enjoy ending your miserable little life, he replied back to her, once again not even bothering to face her as he proceeded to kick the tree at the very base of its trunk, which led to a clean, precise cut all the way through the base of the tree. As the tree fell, Tao proceeded to catch the tree and held it above his head. Says the one that seemed to be struggling to keep up with me in our fight. After all, I believe I cut you more times than I cut you, she retorted back as she traced her tongue over her lips, growing more intrigued by the man the more he let his arrogance show, and that little show of precision and strength he showcased by both making a clean cut through a tree and then holding it above his head. Was just too good for her to ignore. Noticing the adjustments he was making, as well as the intense focus, she tilted her head to the side in curiosity. What are you doing? She asked him in a curious tone of voice. Without turning to her acknowledge her, he replied back. Stand on this pillar and stick to it with your chakra. The trip we're taking shouldn't take long, so you shouldn't take long was all he said to her, which just made the retard shrug and jump onto the tree, curious and eager to see what it was he was going to do. In a flash, he started muttering calculations under his head and adjusting the way he was holding the tree trunk every so often. Eventually, he nodded his head and spoke up to her once more. Try not to fall off, or else you might splatter all over the ground, weakling, he said in a mocking manner, before he proceeded to launch the pillar like a missile into the sky, jumping on it before it got too far away, and stood on top of it with his feet pressed tightly together, keeping his arms folded behind his back as he proceeded to surf the pillar. He was also ignoring the surprised shouts that Mayuri made. The massive tree cruised through the sky at a high rate of speeds, and Mayuri had actually clutched onto him from the shock of what was happening, which had caused Mercenary Tao to scowl in irritation, but he did not push her away, as he figured the shock would pass. Even over the course of the roaring winds, he could hear the heavy breathing of Mayuri, feel her hot breath tickling his neck and spending sensations down his spine. Naturally, he ignored all of that and kept his eyes focused straight ahead, watching the scenery just fly by them. Eventually, just as he predicted, Mayuri calmed down and let go of him, though he could still hear her heavy breathing. Eventually, that breathing of hers calmed down, and she eventually spoke up, the tone in her voice letting him know she wanted to know what the hell just happened. What the hell did you just do? She asked him in a baffled manner, which had caused Tao, whose back was still turned to her and had yet to look in her direction, to smirk in amusement. Yet again, he manages to shock someone with one of his many abilities. It just further reinforced his superiority to those around him, and it never failed to stroke his ego a bit. I calculated the amount of strength I would need to pack into my throw, judging by wind direction, wind speed, weight of what I held, the distance from here to the Kei's no Kuni daimyo's palace, and other such calculations I would need to figure out in order to throw this far enough to be able to surf it to my destination. This allows me to massively cut down the time I need to get somewhere. It may not be teleportation, but it's far faster than running the whole way. Any other questions, frightened little girl? He explained to her in a snarky manner. Mayuri scowled at him in irritation for his calling her what he did. She wasn't frightened, or a little girl, either, she was just surprised by what he had done. The fact that he can make calculations that exact and possess such strength caught her off guard, as she had never heard of such a thing. She had to admit to herself that she was impressed once again by what this blonde-haired assassin could do. It seemed that he was a man of many talents, and his method of getting around was both flashy and very much show-off-like, but it was also impressive and fast. She could probably move faster if she used the Shunshin no Jutsu, but that wasn't nearly as interesting as this tree surfing method of getting around. I wasn't scared, you ponytailed asshole. I was just surprised by what you did, because I haven't seen such a thing before. I know I certainly can't do it, she said, grinding her sharp teeth together as she bitterly retorted back at him, which just caused him to scoff. Of course she couldn't do it, because it was no doubt to him that, although she was a smart and strong fighter, he doubted heavily that she could match his intellect in other areas. However, rather than voice his thoughts on the matter, he allowed the both of them to fall into silence, and Mayuri had quickly forgotten about her anger and just enjoyed the way they were traveling. Time skip. In a flash, far sooner than Mayuri expected, they had entered Kei's no Kuni, and the daimyo's palace was visible off in the horizon. She had been enjoying the sights pass them by, the wind in her face, her hair blowing in the wind, and everything. The Shunshin was more boring, if only because any halfway decent ninja knew it, and while she would still prefer the Shunshin, she would get used to this method of traveling if she was going to be following Mercenary Tao around. She wasn't going to let him get away from him, not when there were plenty of opponents that could potentially kill him and thus deny her of a rematch. When I say so, cancel the flow of your chakra in your feet and jump straight up, he said to her, which caused her to nod her head. When they reached the front gates of the daimyo's palace, Tao proceeded to stamp his feet on the tree and angled it downwards. Right before the tree slammed into the ground, Tao gave Amayuri the signal, and they jumped up into the air. When the tree spiked itself into the ground, they landed feet first gracefully on the trunk of the tree, and they both observed the guards at the front gates, staring at them with widened eyes and dropped jaws. Hesitantly, one of the samurai pulled out his sword and pointed it at them, nervously looking at Amayuri's slashed Kurigakure headband. "Why have you come to our daimyo's palace?" the samurai asked nervous. Tao proceeded to narrow his eyes at the samurai and turned to Amayuri for a moment, telling her with his eyes to let him do the talking. Deciding that he knew what he was doing, the Redeed nodded her head and decided to stay quiet for now. Seeing that he got a confirmation from her, the mercenary turned back to the samurai and spoke up. "My name is Mercenary Tao, and I received a letter from the daimyo asking for my presence," was what the blonde-haired ponytailed assassin had said to the samurai, which had caused the guard's eyes to light up in recognition when he said who he was. Seeing the recognition in his eyes, Tao smirked in a pleased manner when he realized that the guards had already been informed of his arrival. "Ah, yes, the K's no Kuni daimyo told us to expect you and who to look for. You may go in, but not your companion," the samurai said, pointing his blade at the S-rank Kurigakure Nukenin, which caused Tao to look at him with a raised eyebrow. "I promise you that she won't be an issue. If she causes trouble, I'll put her down myself," he said with a shrug of his shoulders, practically feeling the amused grin on the face of Amayuri. He didn't need to see it, he could practically feel it on her face. The two samurai looked at each other for a moment, holding a conversation between them that Tao and Amayuri weren't privy to. Finally, after some deliberation, the two samurai nodded their heads and spoke up to let them know what their decision was. "You may come in, and we will inform the daimyo of your companion." "Wait here," said one of the guards as the other entered the palace to tell the daimyo that Tao arrived, albeit with an unusual companion in tow. The two S-ranked warriors waited patiently for the messenger to come back, and luckily for them, that they didn't have to wait long. The samurai came back, and with a bow of his head, he informed them that they were allowed to enter, which had caused Tao and Amayuri to jump off of the pillar, landing feet first on the ground beneath them and entering the palace. One of the servants in attendance quickly led them to the throne room, where the daimyo was waiting. Once they arrived, the two proceeded to bow their heads respectfully to the rather large daimyo, and they both honed in on the sight of two cloaked individuals in the room with them. They turned to the daimyo that was sitting there and waited for him to speak up. After all, it was polite for the daimyo to speak up first before speaking to him. Though they both may considering themselves superior to the civilian ruler of the countries, that doesn't mean they were going to be foolish enough to earn their ire. "Ah, I am pleased to see you at last, Mercenary Tao, and I see you've brought an S-rank Nukenin with you. My guard has assured me that if she gets out of hand, you'll deal with her, so I see no issue in having her stay. Allow me to get right down to the chase. I have a mission for you that is in 2 parts. There are 7 targets in total. One of my servants shall hand the information over to you now," said the K's no Kuni daimyo as he clapped his hands together twice, which caused a servant standing by the throne to approach Tao and hand over some dossiers on his targets. Tao took them into his hands and proceeded to look through the targets listed. As he examined the dossiers, he noticed that all of them were Sunagakure shinobi and Kunoichi of varying ages. 6 out of the 10 were Fuinjutsu masters or apprentices to those masters, and the last 4 were the Yondaime Kizikage's children and their joint sensei. Tao's eyebrows lifted up into his hairline in surprise. One of them was even the legendary Chiyo, a prominent name from the Second Shinobi War. Well, it was clear that he would be paid triple the price he would never get for each kill he made. Why would the Wind Daimyo want all of these people dead? Amayuri, upon seeing his reaction, read through what he was reading, and she adopted a similar surprised expression herself. However, rather than saying anything, she opted to stay silent and let Tao do the talking, since this was his mission, after all. "But I can easily wipe these cretins out completely with very little effort on my part. Why do you desire me to kill them, Daimyo-sama?" he asked him with a curious tilt of his head, which caused the daimyo to nod his head in understanding, since he knew it was unusual for a daimyo to want to wipe members of his own shinobi force. "As you know, it's not exactly a secret that I've been cutting Sunagakure's funding and sending plenty missions meant for them over to Konohagakure instead. I've decided that having to deal with Sunagakure is just too much of a hassle, and I want to get rid of the village. Unfortunately, if I destroyed it with my own forces, so what I want to do is make it look like a complete accident," the daimyo explained to Tao and Amayuri, which caused the two to widen their eyes just a bit. They were both aware that this daimyo had a reputation of being a stupid fool, but the fact that he actually wanted to wipe one arm of his entire military force just showed how utterly stupid he is. He seemed to have no idea just what kind of power vacuum this would create. Amayuri was about to speak up and inform the daimyo of how foolish he was being, but Tao held his hand up in a stop signal over his shoulder for Amayuri to see and then proceeded to speak up the daimyo. Let me guess, you want me to wipe out the Seal Masters and their apprentices, and then wipe out the team made up of the Yondaime Kizikage's children and their sensei, so that the Ichibi will reform in the desert. It will go on an unstoppable rampage that will lead to the destruction of Tsunagakure no Sado, am I correct? Ow, asked the daimyo, who proceeded to nod his head in confirmation, utterly impressed that the assassin managed to figure out his plan. Amayuri, who stayed silent for the most part, spoke up to ask the daimyo about a small flaw in his plan. Daimyo-sama, what happens if one of the other villages sends seal masters of their own to try and seal the Bijuu for themselves and prevent the destruction of Suna? Amayuri asked the utterly and abysmally foolish daimyo, who just smirked at her in an unconcerned manner and spoke up to her. Let's just say I have contacts who will ensure they are unable to interfere. Only kill the seal masters and their apprentices, leave the sensei and the children alive, as you should kill them when the Chunin exams in Konohagakure comes around. I have information from the Kizikage about something that will happen there, and that will be the best time to kill them. So, will you take the job? The daimyo asked Tao, who proceeded to stroke his chin in thought. He didn't really care if completing the job caused a war or anything like that, because he could just profit from it, and if he did this, he would get a rather good bounty as well. He cared nothing for all of the innocent lives that would be lost, nor of the power vacuum that this would create. After thinking about it for a moment, he eventually nodded his head and bowed to the daimyo. Consider this mission already complete, daimyo-sama. I assume you have a plan that will allow me to get access to the seal masters and their apprentices. Mercenary Tao asked the daimyo with a smirk on his face. Amayuri was surprised that Tao would take the job, but if it gave her a chance to assist Tao in his mission, as well as a chance to cause a little bit of chaos. The mere thought of that caused her to smirk in excitement, and her blood was boiling with the thought of what she was going to get to do. Cracking her neck eagerly, she waited to hear what this plan was. I have another person that will be a part of this mission that works for a secret organization, and he happens to be an explosives expert. When the first explosion triggers inside of the village, that will let you know when to begin your attack. Once the last of the sealing team are dead, retreat and get away as fast you can. Do you understand, Mercenary Tao? The daimyo asked, which caused both of the S-ranked fighters to nod their heads. Smirking in a pleased manner, the daimyo dismissed them, and with a bow, the two turned their backs and proceeded to leave the palace. Unknowing to them, the very minute they turned their backs, the Kei's no Kuni's eyes went blank and momentarily flashed with the image of a three-tomoed Sharingan, before disappearing entirely. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys, let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.